He leaned back in his big leather chair, looked at the invoice I had just handed him, and told me that a one-man studio like mine had no real way to make a company like his pay. 19 days later, the website his entire product launch depended on went dark. His legal team was begging me to talk, and he ended up paying nearly 3 times the original bill. People always ask me if I broke something to make that happen. I didn't. I never touched a single line of his code in anger. I just enforced, word for word, the contract he signed himself and never bothered to read. But to understand how a man who tried to stiff a freelancer ended up paying for it 3 times over, you need to understand exactly what he agreed to. For 7 years, I ran a tiny design and development studio, just me and a couple of contractors I brought in when a project got big. No corner office, no sales team, just clean work delivered on time for clients who mostly treated me well. I built websites, brand systems, and the kind of back-end platforms that quietly run a business behind the scenes. The unglamorous machinery, the part the customer never sees, but the company cannot live without. I had learned one lesson early, and it had saved me more than once. Every project I took on started with the same thing: a contract, a signed scope of work, and one specific clause that most clients skimmed right past. Let me explain that clause, because it is the entire reason this story has the ending it does. The clause was simple and completely standard for my industry. It said that everything I created stayed my property until the final invoice was paid in full. The work was only licensed to the client after the money cleared. Until then, the code, the designs, the hosting access, all of it legally belonged to me. I was renting it to them in good faith while they paid. I did not invent this to be clever. Photographers do it. Architects do it. It exists precisely because small creators get burned by big clients who assume the little guy will never fight back. For 7 years, I almost never had to use that clause. Most people just pay. And honestly, that is the trap of a clause like this. When everyone behaves, it sits there invisible, doing nothing, looking like boring legal paperwork. And when something is invisible, the wrong kind of client assumes it is meaningless. Then I landed the biggest contract of my career. A growing company launching a new product line. Let's call the man in charge Preston. Preston was a director of marketing who had just been handed a budget and a deadline. He spoke fast, he name-dropped constantly, and he made it very clear in our very first call that he was doing me a favor by even considering someone my size. The project was huge. A full commerce platform, a brand site, an inventory system, and a launch campaign, all wired together. 3 months of work, the kind of contract that could carry my studio for half a year. We signed everything. Scope of work, timeline, payment schedule, and yes, the ownership clause, sitting right there in plain language for anyone who cared to read it. He signed it in under a minute. He did not read a word. To Preston, the contract was a formality. To me, it was the foundation everything else stood on. I delivered everything. On time, every milestone signed off, every screen approved, every feature tested. The launch site was fast, clean, and ready. He told his bosses it was perfect. Then I sent the final invoice. $90,000, exactly as agreed, for 3 months of work with the smaller deposits already deducted. And that is when Preston changed. First, the invoice was under review. Then there were concerns about quality, concerns no one had mentioned during the dozen approvals along the way. Then he stopped replying for a week. When I finally got him on the phone, he dropped a line I will never forget. He told me calmly that the work was already on their servers, that his company had lawyers, and I clearly did not, and that a studio of one had no realistic way to force a company of his size to pay. He suggested I accept a fraction of the bill and be grateful for the exposure. I did not raise my voice. I just thanked him for his time, hung up, and opened a folder on my desk. Here is what Preston never understood. He thought the work was already his. It wasn't. Not legally. Not yet. Because of that one clause he never read, the entire launch platform was still my property. He was using it on a license, and that license was conditional on one thing only: payment in full, which had not happened. He thought he was holding all the cards. In reality, he was running his company's biggest product launch on software that, the moment he refused to pay, he no longer had any legal right to use. He had just taken on the one person who owned the ground his whole launch was standing on, and he had done it in writing, in emails, on the record. So I stopped asking nicely. Asking was never going to work on a man like Preston. Instead, I started building a case. Preston did not wait quietly either. That kind of man never does. When I sent a polite written reminder that payment was overdue, he escalated. He had an assistant email me to say the matter was closed. that they considered the work delivered and the relationship finished, and that any further contact would be treated as harassment. He even forwarded part of my own contract back to me, the part about delivery, as if it proved his point. He had read exactly enough to feel confident and not one line more. What he had skipped, of course, was the section 3 paragraphs down. The one that said the license to use my work activated only upon full payment, and that until then I retained all rights, including the right to revoke access. So he had just put it in writing that he considered the project complete and intended to keep using it without paying. That email was not a threat to me. It was a gift. It was proof, in his own words, of exactly what he intended to do. I printed it, I dated it, and I added it to the folder. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something very simple. I got everything in order. I gathered every signed approval, every milestone sign-off, every email where Preston or his team praised the work. The quality concerns had appeared only after the invoice, and I could prove it with timestamps. Then I reread my own contract, slowly, the way he never had. The ownership clause, the revocation clause, the late payment terms, which allowed me to charge interest on every overdue day. The clause that said if I had to pursue collection, the client would cover my legal and recovery costs. I had not written these terms to be cruel. I had written them years ago with a lawyer for exactly this kind of moment, and Preston had signed every one of them. Then I made one phone call I had been putting off. To a contract attorney who specialized in unpaid creative work, I sent her the whole folder. She read it, called me back, and said something I will never forget. She said this was the cleanest case she had seen in a year, and that the contract did almost all the work for us. I said nothing more to Preston directly. People like Preston cannot be argued with. They can only be shown through the one channel they actually respect, which is consequences. And the contract gave me 2 specific, completely legal letters. The first was a formal demand letter and a collections claim, with interest and costs attached. The second was the one Preston had handed me himself by refusing to pay, the right to revoke the license. To take back the use of work he had never actually bought. So I lined up both, carefully, by the book, with my lawyer's signature on every page. First came the formal demand letter, sent by my attorney on real letterhead. It laid out the signed contract, the delivered and approved work, the unpaid balance, and the interest now accruing daily. It gave Preston's company a final window to pay in full. Preston's response was to ignore it. He assumed it was a bluff. He kept the site live and pushed ahead toward his launch date, so I executed the second lever exactly as the contract allowed. Because the work was still legally mine until payment, I formally revoked the license, in writing, with proper notice, and I withdrew the hosting and access credentials that the contract specifically named as mine to hold until the invoice cleared. I did not delete his data. I did not destroy anything. I did not touch his internal systems. I simply stopped renting him my property, which I had every documented right to do, and I notified him the moment I did it. 19 days before his big launch, the platform his entire campaign depended on went dark. Not broken, just no longer licensed to a company that had refused to pay for it. The phone calls started within the hour. First Preston, no longer calm. Then his manager. Then, finally, the one I had been waiting for. His company's actual legal department, who had clearly just read the contract for the very first time. And here is the part Preston never saw coming. His own lawyers told him I was completely within my rights. The contract was airtight. The work was mine until paid. The revocation was valid. The interest was valid. The recovery costs were valid. There was no loophole, because the loophole would have been not reading the document he signed. I did not gloat. I did not insult anyone. I simply let my attorney restate the terms, in writing, calmly, pay the full invoice, plus the accrued interest, plus the legal and recovery cost the contract required, and the license would be reinstated immediately. Same day, even. The launch was 19 days out. Their marketing budget was spent. Their press was scheduled. Rebuilding the platform from scratch would have taken months they did not have. The company paid, all of it. The original $90,000, the interest, and every cost of collection. It came to nearly 3 times what Preston could have settled for with a single honest payment weeks earlier. The moment the payment cleared, I did exactly what I promised. I reinstated the license and restored access that same afternoon. The launch went ahead, on time, on the platform I built. But the story did not end with the money, because the demand letter, the revocation, and the settlement had all gone through the company's legal and finance departments. The people above Preston finally learned the full timeline. They saw the signed approvals. They saw the praise emails. They saw that a clean $90,000 invoice had ballooned into a far bigger payout for one reason only. Their own director had decided a small studio was too small to fight back. I heard, some months later, that Preston was quietly moved off external vendor relationships entirely. The company did not make a scene. Men like Preston rarely get a dramatic exit. He was simply, gently, removed from the very thing he had abused. And the final paperwork that closed out the contract, the document confirming the license was now permanently transferred, needed a signature from the owner of the work. From me, it came to my desk, I read it twice, and then I signed it. A week later, the company's operations lead reached out, in person, and asked me something Preston never had. She asked if I would consider a long-term contract directly with them, with him nowhere in the chain. I quoted my new rate. They accepted it without blinking. I never raised my voice. I never sabotaged anyone. I never deleted his data or broke a single rule. All I did was refuse to let a man with a big title and zero respect take 3 months of my work for free on the assumption that small means powerless. Here is what Preston never learned and what cost him everything. A contract is not paperwork you skim and forget. It is a promise with teeth. And the most dangerous person to underestimate is the quiet one who actually read it, kept the receipts, and is calm enough to enforce it word for word. He thought owning the work meant having it on his servers. He discovered, far too late, that using something and owning it have never been the same thing. So let me ask you, have you ever had a client or a company try to stiff you, assuming you were too small to push back? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you believe Preston got exactly what he deserved, hit that subscribe button, because here at Karma Fyles, the bill always comes due. The next story is about an HOA president who was absolutely certain the rules only applied to everyone else. He was about to find out what happens when they finally apply to him.